One of the biggest problems I've noticed within the so-called black community is that, well, at least parts of the so-called black community, if you can even call it that, because it's become so fragmented and fractured. There are different value systems, which makes for different subsects. But one of the biggest problems I've noticed is how there is a celebration of criminality, a promotion of criminality, and at the very most neutral level, there's an empathizing or sympathizing with the criminals as opposed to those who are being violated. And this creates for larger problems. For example, in California, there were laws that were put into place which decriminalized a lot of these so-called petty crimes, which would have been felonies before. So all of a sudden, you could steal anything under $950 without any repercussions. It would be a slap on the wrist. More cases than not, you could just run up in a store, wipe the place out, run out, and nothing would actually happen. They wouldn't pursue the case. They wouldn't put any sort of resources behind it, etc. And so when you have these types of laws in place because of a government such as California's government, which is this woke, ideological, quote unquote, progressive, anti-racist government that is looking to sympathize with the quote unquote criminal, which is very offensive, mind you, especially to those who they are trying to quote unquote protect. They're saying, well, if you criminalize these things, then a lot of black people are going to be in jail, which is you basically saying that black people are criminals, right? That's inherently offensive. You're trying to protect them by decriminalizing, so you're actually stating that they are criminals. But I digress. The true issue that I see here is we then end up having a criminal culture where it's like back in the day, let's say even pre-Civil Rights Act. It was shameful to be a criminal. In the black community, if you were somebody who was running amok, you were ostracized. You were an outsider. It's like out of wedlock birth, right? Ostracized. These were taboos. To be a single mother or a single father, to not have a foundation in your household was looked down upon. Being on the welfare system was looked down upon. It's not to say that there weren't individuals who were parts of the system, or there weren't individuals who, were indeed living in such a way, or maybe because of circumstances, etc., they ended up in, having a single mother household or ended up on the welfare system, whatever it may be. But that was not seen as a path that one would choose intentionally. Whereas now we've created a culture that celebrates these things. It pedestalizes. And how do I know they celebrate, or we have even allowed for the celebration? Look at hip hop. Look at rap, which is oftentimes called a huge part of black culture, right? We like to claim it and say, well, this was created by black folks. This is a black American thing. And so this is our thing. Okay, if you're going to claim it, then you have to take everything that comes with it. That's what comes with that, right? It's like if you're going to claim hillbilly culture or redneck culture, you got to claim everything that comes with it, all the degeneracy and everything else that's there. So when you look at quote unquote hip hop culture or rap culture, you can see that criminality is something that is promoted and celebrated. You have an individual who is locked up, and you have more of an emphasis to get that person out of prison and more of a celebration when they do come out of prison than a kid who is going into the university system, graduating, and actually doing something productive with their life. I've seen many of these cases where there are parties being had for dudes coming out of prison, but yet the little brother or the cousin or somebody else in the family who's doing right is not celebrated in the same way. And that's a true systemic problem, right? It's in the culture. It's baked into what the people have allowed as a value system. And that's why I always come back to this argument of this is not a conversation about racism or the lack thereof. There's always going to be those who are ignorant. There's always going to be those who are hateful, etc., right? But as far as what's actually holding the people back as a collective, it's about culture. It's about what is accepted. What are the norms within these households? That's why you can have, one group of immigrants who come into this country and they run amok, They run a damn fool in these streets. Then you have another group of people who come here and they create something for themselves. They're real quiet. They're in the cut. They build up what they got to build up. And in 1 or 2 generations, they've built up wealth, right? Because they prioritize something different. Their culture has different norms. You go into Africa and go into some of these nations, there's going to be different personalities in every nation, and even, broken up into different regions. But you can go into one country and they might be destitute, poor, but yet the people have certain values. And so you're not going to get robbed. It's going to be safer than some of the wealthy places in another country, right? It's like you go to San Francisco, that is one of the wealthiest cities in America. Yet you don't feel safe in those streets half the time. Whereas you can go to, let's say, I was going to say Lagos, but I can't even speak of Lagos because that might be closer to San Francisco at this point in history. But you can go to a place like, let's say, Accra in Ghana, right, where I was about 3 years back. I was walking through those streets at 11, 12, sometimes close to 1 a.m., just walking down, pick up food. They're still cooking, fried yam and all types of stuff like that. I would walk over to the spot as a foreigner, and I felt safe in those environments. Now, I'm not saying that everywhere is exactly like that, but it's to say that even in areas where you might find poverty, you don't necessarily find the link of criminality, because they're not interlinked in the way that we have been told. We've been told that poverty creates criminality. No, a culture that fosters or allows for criminality creates more criminality. When you have laws like the one in San Francisco, maybe you would have had 2 out of every 10 people who are actually going to steal, and suffer the actual repercussions of being locked up. When you decriminalize that, you now might have 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 individuals who are willing to steal and are okay with it because there's not going to be consequences. So you have emboldened another 4 individuals or 40% of people to go in there and steal. And maybe all you have left are, 4 to 5 people who just won't steal because that is their own moral compass. And so the more you promote, the more you allow for, the more you make it acceptable, because that's all culture really is. It's what is accepted within this culture. What are our norms? What are our customs? Right? What do we do? Who are we? How do we present ourselves to the world? That's why clothing and things of that nature are very closely associated with culture. When they talked about the sagging of the pants and how that was prison culture, representing something that a lot of these young boys would pull their pants up real quick if they actually understood what the hell that was signaling to the world. But these things, prison culture, gang culture, etc., became embedded into the mainstream culture. And it's problematic for all people. It doesn't matter what you look like. It's never been a racial thing. That's why I continue to bring up culture. We always want to point to race, but then if you just look at race alone, now you have to say, well, then it is one race inferior to another because why is one race doing it more than everybody else? Why is there a usual suspect? We don't like to talk about this in public because we want to hide it. You want to hide your cousin. You want to hide your nephews. You want to hide whatever it is and the dysfunction that you're seeing on scale. But it's really not a race conversation. We got to let that aspect go and start to look at culture. What are we allowing ourselves to value? People who don't hold the values of the hood, the values of the streets or whatever it may be, and they're black, they're going to move the hell up out those environments when they have enough resources. Every time. Like on, next Friday? I always said if I got me some money, I was going to stay in the hood. As soon as I got me some money, I was gone. Absolutely. Most people are going to leave those environments if they can, because those environments have now become like hotbeds of that culture, of that prison culture, of that gang culture, of a culture of degeneracy and toxicity. Again, I break the conversation apart from just merely race, because it's not a race thing. As we go into history, we see that those who had such cultures, the Italian Americans, etc., at a certain point in American history, there was a huge criminal culture, a huge gang culture, mafioso culture, and that was now becoming a part of the norm. So being a certain way was being made okay. Whereas, now these individuals, I guess, picked up, certain customs that they're not necessarily the most problematic individuals. They're not the ones you got to look for, at night. It's not the usual suspect is not it's not Lorenzo or Tony at this point. And it shouldn't be anybody, but unfortunately, we find more and more cases of individuals who look like us, who look like me, that are the usual suspect. Look, I'm not a sugarcoater by any means, by any stretch. And if you get offended by facts, that's between you and the donkey that you rode in on. But we have to be honest. Why is it that I'm on X and 7 out of the 10 people doing the most foolish stuff look like this? Because individuals within this space, within this demographic, have allowed for this to be okay within the culture. And so it pervades, it permeates. You start to identify with it. And we have to break apart from that. We have to fragment it. And I even say, we have to separate ourselves from these individuals to begin with. That's self-preservation. That's why also I uncoupled the aspect of it's just about race. And when you have that racist mindset, or that mindset that is fixated on race, you just think everything through the lens of race. So you think, well, white people are all looking at me that way anyway. Who told you that? Who told you that? Maybe you had experiences in your past, and so you project those onto everything else that happens, right? You see every slight as racism. You see everything that happens through the lens of racism. And I understand, trust me, trauma can stick. And if you do not deal with it in a healthy, productive way, if you don't boss up on that damn trauma, it will carry throughout your life, and you will have a warped perception of the world. And many people walking around with that warped perception. They're walking around with these not so rose-colored lenses, with these dim lenses, seeing the world in that way. And so they continue to perpetuate behaviors, and we continue to egg it on. We continue to make it okay. We have, maybe a true level of empathy in there, but really there's also a part of us which is afraid to be exposed. Whenever I see people defending criminality, I see them defending 304 culture, or, all these sorts of dysfunctional ways. All I think to myself is, do you know that you're showing your own hand? You're actually showing what you're willing to allow to get away with, for self as well as others. Maybe you got that grandma type of love, and you want to you want to coddle, but coddling is not going to lead to correction. You need to correct, and then you can coddle after the fact, right? What we oftentimes call tough love, which is just real love, which is telling somebody the truth, to say, this is dysfunctional, this is problematic, and I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to put up with it in my house. I'm not going to put up with it in our environment. You're not going to pollute this ecosystem and let your little brother and your little sister, whoever it is, to go in the same path as you. I did a video not too long ago. Hopefully it's out by this point. And it was of a mama who was going the hell off on her daughter. I guess her daughter posted a video where she was talking about her dead ops or whatever. And her mama was like, she was cussing her up and down. And she said, you better can apologize to them. Apologize to that family. Apologize to that boy. Like, the mama was going in. She said, you ain't no motherfucking thug. You ain't no gangster. You ain't. And you could tell the mama was from that element, but she wanted better for her daughter. So communication method was a little, it was what it was. But she was looking to do better and to communicate this message to her daughter, because she doesn't want the proliferation. She doesn't want the continuation of that criminal culture. That's a conscious decision that is now being made. And that's a decision that we all have to make at a certain point. What are we going to put up with, and what are we going to excommunicate from our ecosystem? You go back to Africa. Again, I was born in Africa. So from the age of 0 to the age of 10, I was in Zimbabwe and then South Africa. And what you get to understand is that it's like everybody has this, or everybody, most people in the West have this perception that Africa is just, Africa. Some still think it's a country, which is embarrassing, but it's a multitude of countries. But within those countries, there's a multitude of tribes. So your next door neighbor might be a different tribe, and tribes are broken up by customs, by culture. So just because we look the exact same doesn't mean we have the same culture. It doesn't mean we share the exact same historic context. And that's the short-sightedness of race. When you fixate on race, you can't go outside of the conversation of these are different peoples by custom. Just like with white folk, you can see the Swedes, and you can see, the Danish folks, and they're different people. You see the Belgians, they're different people. We look at it, look at the white folks. They don't look at it that way. They see themselves as a part of that culture. right? That nation, if we want to break it down to that at this point. But even when you go to Africa, it's like go to Nigeria and see how many tribes. It's not just the Nigerians, though there may be an affinity, there's still going to be different dialects, different languages, different subsects. This one does this and this one does that, and they're polar opposites as far as how they actually move through life. And so I believe that this may very well be what is actually taking place. There might be a fragmenting that is necessary, where it's tribal. That's a part of who we are. We have to separate ourselves from the tribes who do not resonate with the things that we do, the things that we support. So if we support having these values, God, family, of being productive in society as opposed to destructive in society, if these are the things that we hold as our values, and here we have dysfunction, toxicity, drama, chaos, we have to separate ourselves from that. That can no longer be a part of our narrative. We are not the same culture as these individuals. You look at the woke ideology and the culture that they're creating. It's like, it's okay to chop off your private parts or to take the kids and mutilate them. And we're not a part of that culture. 304 culture. We're not going to be a part of that culture. We're not going to promote being a streetwalker. We're not going to promote that. Oh, but S work is work too. In your world it is, not in ours. We're not going to promote that in our households. We're not going to push that in our households. We're a different culture altogether. And so I believe the faster we begin to recalibrate in that way, the better it's going to be. And that doesn't create for more division. It creates for more consistency within the groups. And then groups can come together and we can collaborate. And then if we see, there's two matching cultures, that's when you now become combined. As opposed to trying to force with something that you are completely in opposition to. Criminality, dysfunction, toxicity as the natural order of the day.
I used to be afraid of the dark, place unknown like a heart in their heart. I used to see my life in the bar, now the kids unchained, every shackle is lost. 2 steps in the moonlight, 2-step in the daytime. You just know when it feel right, you got a feeling the time's not. See you through those shades that I just threw on. Through my lenses, you just can't do no wrong. I fell in love with myself again. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking. A 365, that's a full rotation. I see you looking up, you know them constellations. Constantly gazing like house of praises, you get to praising.